In the heart of a raging blizzard, rescuers heard the faintest cry. Buried in the snow, they found a tiny bobcat kitten, half frozen, motherless, and moments from death. No one believed he could survive, until an unlikely savior stepped in. Not a vet, not a ranger, but a grieving Maine Coon cat who had just lost her own kittens. What happened next would melt even the coldest heart. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. Hit like, share, and subscribe to join us for more true stories of survival and love. The Cascade Mountains, ancient, wild, and merciless, roared beneath the weight of a brutal snowstorm. Wind screamed down the valleys, tearing through twisted pines and shattering the silence with the fury only winter knows. On this night, every living thing seemed to vanish, swallowed by the endless white. But deep within the swirling blizzard, a single desperate sound fought against the storm, a faint, almost invisible cry, lost and fragile as a snowflake in the wind. Somewhere between the cliffs and shadowed crevices, a wild bobcat mother moved with frantic purpose. Her name would never be known to the world, but in this moment, she was everything to the tiny life pressed to her chest. She could smell the storm's cold teeth and feel the hunger of the wild pressing in from every side. Snow caked her whiskers. Her breath rose in pale clouds. Yet she ran, weaving through fallen logs and icy rocks, searching for shelter that wasn't there. Then, with no warning, the earth shuddered. A thunderous crack, an avalanche, ruthless and final, tore down the slope. In the split second before the world turned to chaos, the bobcat mother did what only a mother would. She shoved her tiny kitten into the hollow of a rock, her body a shield against the cold. There was no time for anything more. The snow roared down, swallowing everything, leaving only silence. Hours passed. The storm raged, then faded, leaving behind a world remade by ice. Morning brought a sky washed pale and the hush of a world holding its breath. It was then that the park rangers came, their boots crunching through the drifts, eyes stinging from the cold. They were searching for fallen trees, lost hikers, maybe nothing at all. But one ranger, his name was Ellis, the kind who always noticed things others missed, paused. He thought he heard a sound, softer than the wind. There, wedged in a narrow crevice, was a kitten no larger than his glove. Gray-spotted, ears flat, eyes barely open. Frost rimed his tiny fur. He trembled, not from fear, but from cold that reached all the way to his fragile bones. Ellis leaned closer, hardly daring to hope. The kitten's breath steamed for a moment, then faltered. Another ranger, hardened by years in the wild, shook his head, already turning away. But Ellis wasn't ready to let go. He slipped off his scarf and bundled the kitten inside, feeling the weak flutter of life against his skin. They raced back through the snow, every step heavy with doubt. The world outside was unforgiving, but inside the Cascade Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, hope flickered like a small, stubborn flame. The center was little more than a converted ranger station. Wood walls, a battered stove, the smell of hay and disinfectant. But here, warmth was more than temperature. It was hands working fast, voices hushed, eyes searching for any sign of life. The storm outside became a memory. The kitten, still nameless, lay wrapped in towels, a tiny heartbeat in a sea of white. No one spoke the truth aloud, but everyone felt it. This life hung by a thread. A mother's sacrifice, a stranger's kindness, a world of snow and silence, Everything had led to this moment. And as the first rays of sun slanted through the frosted window, lighting up the kitten's trembling body, it was clear that this was not just a story of survival. It was the beginning of something no one could predict. Because sometimes, in the harshest winter, the smallest voice can carry farther than the storm, and sometimes, hope is born in the coldest places. Inside the rescue center, the storm's echo still lingered. The wind battered the windows, but inside a hush had settled. Every breath seemed to hold its own question. What chance did a wild bobcat kitten, orphaned and freezing, really have? Dr. Eris Thorne, the center's lead vet, stood over the little creature, worry sharpening his face. The kitten, now called Storm, lay curled, his body barely responding to the gentle heat of the warming pads. His small sides rose and fell, the rhythm uncertain, fragile as the morning light. Across the room, a different kind of silence drifted from a shadowed corner. There, nestled in a battered wool blanket, lay Willow, the center's resident Maine Coon. Once the queen of the shelter, Willow had changed since losing her entire litter just weeks before. She moved little, her once glorious fur now dull, her green eyes distant and unreadable. Staff came and went, offering treats and quiet words, but nothing could fill the emptiness. She curled tighter into herself, as if she could vanish from a world that had taken too much. Storm's first night in the center was a test of patience and hope. No bottle, no formula, not even the gentle touch of Aris's hand could coax him to eat. He shivered, turning away, searching for something not even the most skilled rescuer could provide. It wasn't hunger, it was longing. Longing for warmth, heartbeat, the press of another living soul. His cries grew softer, almost surrendering. Aris watched, torn between knowledge and helplessness. He had seen many wild creatures pass through these doors, some fighting, some fading. But there was something in Storm's stubborn grip on life, a defiance even as he trembled. Still, the odds were cruel, and the cold outside seemed to seep in, daring hope to try and fail. Late that night, as the snow deepened and the center's lights flickered low, Aris made a decision that would change everything. He remembered Willow, her loss, her stillness, the echo of something missing in her eyes. It was a wild thought, a gamble born not from science but from faith in the strange ways grief sometimes finds its match. He lifted Storm gently, wrapped in soft towels, and crossed the room. Willow did not move, only flicked an ear in silent warning. Aris knelt, laying the kitten near Willow's curled side, and waited. Minutes stretched. Willow sniffed, huffed, then turned away. Storm, too weak to protest, simply lay still, his tiny body radiating cold. The room felt even quieter, as if the whole center was holding its breath. Time moved in tiny increments, the ticking of the clock, the soft settling of snow on the window ledge. For a long while, nothing happened. But then, just as Aris was about to give up, Willow shifted. She stretched, slowly, her nose tracing a line down the towel. She stopped at Storm, nostrils flaring, reading a language older than memory. In that moment, two griefs collided, tentative and raw. Willow lowered her head, a single breath stirring the kitten's fur. She did not purr, she did not nuzzle, but she did not turn away. Hope flickered in the gloom, fragile, yes, but alive. For a while, nothing changed. Storm lay where Aris had left him, a scrap of life pressed against Willow's massive flank. Willow remained still, her eyes half closed, her breath slow and even, as if the world outside could not reach her in this pocket of quiet grief. Yet as the night deepened, something subtle shifted in the hush. A shiver passed through Storm's frail body, barely more than a twitch, but enough to draw Willow's attention. She opened her eyes fully, green and watchful, the kind of gaze that measures the distance between danger and surrender. Storm whimpered, a sound softer than falling snow. Willow listened, something ancient awakening beneath the sadness. She leaned down, her wide nose brushing the kitten's fur, and breathed him in, wild musk, milkless hunger, the chill of a world too big for one so small. Almost on instinct, Willow extended a paw, massive and gentle, settling it beside the shivering kitten. She gave him a single, tentative lick, slow and rough, as if testing the reality of him. For a moment, Storm stiffened. But then, recognizing some echo of comfort, he relaxed, pressing his tiny head closer to her warmth. The room, usually filled with the low hum of machines and distant footsteps, now held only the music of Willow's purr, a low, rumbling sound, unexpected and powerful. She curled herself around Storm, her body forming a living wall against the cold that pressed against every window, layer by layer. Warmth seeped into the kitten, melting the frost that clung to his fur and perhaps the ice that lingered in Willow's heart. Morning came slow and silver, painting the walls with light. Aris, who had slept fitfully on a cot in the next room, returned to find the pair curled together, Storm breathing deeply, a fragile but steady rhythm. Willow's fur was a tangled nest around him, her eyes now open, no longer hollow but alert, protective. The days that followed unfolded quietly, almost like a dream. Willow took to her new charge with a patience that stunned the staff. She licked Storm clean, nudging him upright when he slumped. She let him burrow beneath her thick mane, sharing her warmth as if it were something infinite. When Storm's tiny body quaked with hunger, Willow lay so still that he could pretend, if only for a heartbeat, that he belonged there. Safe. Sometimes, late at night, Aris would watch from the doorway, struck by the simple miracle of it all. The shelter was still battered by winter, but inside life pressed back. Willow's loss had not vanished, but it had shifted, reshaped by the soft weight of the kitten now tangled in her fur. Storm, once only a whisper against death, now purred back at his surrogate mother, a music of hope threading through the cold. What began as a gamble now felt like something close to destiny, a bond stitched from two broken hearts, holding fast against the dark. Winter outside showed no mercy. Snow piled higher against the rescue center's walls, muffling the world in a quiet so deep it seemed almost holy. Yet inside something softer was taking root, a rhythm of breath, warmth, and small, ordinary miracles. Weeks slipped by, each one layering new strength into Storm's once frail body. His fur thickened, his eyes grew clearer, and his legs, uncertain at first, learned the patterns of standing and stumbling and eventually play. Through it all, Willow remained his silent instructor. She did not teach with sound, but with the careful choreography of survival passed down through generations. When Storm shivered, Willow drew him closer, wrapping herself around him so tightly that not even the chill could find its way in. When Storm's coat grew matted or dirty, Willow licked him clean, sometimes with a patience that seemed endless, and when he fumbled awkwardly with his paws, Unsure where safety ended and courage began, Willow nudged him gently, as if to say, "Try again." Their days settled into a pattern both mundane and profound. At dawn, light seeped through the frosted windows, painting them in pale gold. Willow would stretch, her mane fanning out, and Storm would yawn, ears twitching, ready for another day. Sometimes, when the staff gathered near the old wood stove, they would pause to watch the pair. There was something sacred in the way Willow let Storm climb and tumble, tolerating his sharp little claws and sudden bursts of energy with a mother's endless forbearance. On quieter afternoons, Storm would curl beside the fire, soaking in its heat. Eris would sit nearby, journal in hand, watching as Willow taught her charge with only a look or a gentle touch. There was no need for words. The language of loss and hope was written in every gesture, every brush of fur, every patient moment when Storm, tired from play, pressed his head to Willow's side and listened to the steady beat of her heart. As the days grew a fraction longer, Aris sometimes caught himself marveling at the patchwork family unfolding before him. A wild bobcat kitten, mothered by a cat who herself had nothing left to give, or so it seemed. But life, he realized, always finds a way. Even when shaped by sorrow, even when stitched from broken pieces, there is something in the world that insists on mending, on sparking warmth in the coldest places. And so the little family glowed, a soft flame against the long winter darkness. Storm grew bolder with each passing day, but he never strayed far from Willow's side. She, in turn, guarded him with a devotion born not just of instinct, but of having lost and found, of knowing what it means to keep hope alive for another. Outside, snow still fell, but inside, in the small circle of light and fur and trust, the harsh world seemed, if only for a while, very far away. As winter loosened its grip, the world beyond the rescue center shifted almost imperceptibly. Icicles dripped, snow retreated from the windows, and the wind's sharp howl softened into a sigh. But inside, another kind of thaw was quietly taking place. A stirring, a restless energy that neither warmth nor affection could contain. Storm was changing. Where once he clung to Willow, he now explored the edges of their world with newfound boldness. His movements lost some of their clumsy innocence. Paws that once stumbled now sprang, his muscles lengthening beneath his dappled fur. He played longer and harder, sometimes pouncing on shadows, sometimes chasing drifting feathers with a speed that startled even himself. Willow watched, never far, but no longer always at his side. There were moments, small at first, but impossible to ignore, when the line between gentle play and wildness began to blur. One crisp morning, the kitchen door had been left ajar just a moment too long, letting in a brief flurry of snow and, without warning, a sparrow. The bird flitted and panicked, wings a blur, until fate brought it close to the floor. Storm's reaction was instant, driven by something deeper than memory. He froze, every muscle coiled, eyes locked on his quarry. Then, in a flash, he pounced, swift, silent, the strike of a creature born for the hunt. The bird barely fluttered before Storm's jaws closed around it. He turned, pride shimmering in his gaze, and carried the limp sparrow to Willow, laying it before her feet. The room seemed to hold its breath. Willow, wise and battered, understood more than anyone. She sniffed the offering, her gaze lingering on Storm's face, not with reproach, but with a quiet, heavy acceptance. Storm waited, tail twitching, his wild heritage as plain as the snowy peaks that crowned the mountains beyond. Staff found them like this: the sparrow on the tile, Storm sitting tall beside Willow, the silence between them charged with something primal. There was no violence in the act, only inevitability, a reminder that love can shelter, can soften, but cannot erase what nature has written in bone and blood. Aris, watching from the doorway, felt the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. For all the healing, all the warmth and tenderness, there would always be a part of Storm the wild would call back. Willow, too, seemed to understand. She licked Storm's ear, a slow, forgiving gesture, then curled around him once more, not to restrain, but to comfort. The bond remained, but now it flickered with worry. How long, she seemed to ask with every quiet glance. Could motherly warmth hold back the wilderness growing inside the kitten she'd come to love as her own? Outside, the snow continued its slow retreat. Inside, the line between wild and home shimmered, thin, uncertain, and soon, perhaps, impossible to keep. Spring sunlight streamed weakly through the rescue center's windows, chasing away the last ghosts of winter. But the thaw brought something sharper than melting snow, a ripple of unease that crept into every quiet corner. Word of Storm's remarkable story had traveled further than Aris ever intended. One morning, as he checked the logbook and Willow dozed near the fire, a government vehicle crunched over the gravel outside. The air shifted. Routine ended. A wildlife inspector stepped through the door, clipboard in hand, boots streaked with salt and mud. She introduced herself in brisk tones, her eyes flickering with both curiosity and skepticism as she looked first at Storm, then at Willow. Aris braced himself, feeling an old knot tighten in his chest. The inspection was thorough and impersonal. She watched Storm move about the room, noting his strength, the way his muscles rolled beneath his spotted coat, his alertness. Nothing like a house cat. No matter how tender the bond that had grown here. Storm eyed the stranger warily, but curiosity pulled him closer, nose twitching. Willow kept her distance, a silent guardian. The inspector's questions were careful but relentless. How long had the bobcat been here? What steps were being taken toward rewilding? Did Aris truly understand the regulations? Every answer felt like walking a wire. Aris tried to explain the miracle he'd witnessed, the healing, the bond, the quiet lessons passed from mother to orphan. But the words felt small beneath the weight of policy. At last, the inspector's verdict hung in the room like a blade. "If you keep him here much longer," she said, her tone not unkind but unyielding, "he'll forget where he belongs. The wild will become something distant. And then what future does he have?" Aris nodded, lips pressed thin, the implications settling on his shoulders. He understood, of course. Storm was not a pet, not a curiosity, not a miracle meant for display. He was wild, born of the mountains, shaped by storms harsher than any winter the center could shelter him from. Still, it hurt. Aris's mind replayed every night Willow curled around Storm, every step forward the kitten had taken, every gentle nudge and lesson in trust. He glanced at Willow, who sat now beside Storm, her eyes unreadable, as if she too sensed the world closing in. Days passed, but nothing felt the same. Staff grew quieter. Willow watched Aris with something like accusation, as if she understood his private torment. The line between doing what feels right and what is right for the wild can be impossibly thin. Storm, meanwhile, grew restless, pacing the length of the sunlit room, claws ticking against the floor, his wildness too large to hide for much longer. The world beyond the rescue center called, insistent and impossible to ignore. The bond inside could not stop the turning of the seasons, nor the rules written for creatures who must someday choose between comfort and freedom. And so love waited, uneasy, suspended, caught on a line as fragile as spring ice, knowing that soon it would have to let go. The decision, when it finally came, felt less like a single moment and more like the slow melting of winter. Inevitable, gentle, but heavy with loss. With spring's thaw, Aris and his team prepared Storm for the world beyond glass and timber, beyond the quiet warmth of Willow's fur. The center's largest outdoor enclosure, once just a paddock behind the woodshed, had been transformed. Staff cleared away the last piles of icy snow, strung branches between rocks, scattered logs and stones to mimic the rugged hills of Storm's true home. The air tasted brighter now, alive with the earthy promise of things waking up after long sleep. On a pale morning, Aris carried Storm, now nearly as long as Willow herself, to the new enclosure. The moment the gate swung open, Storm hesitated, his paws curling tight beneath him. He looked back, searching for Willow. She sat by the glass wall inside, her eyes never leaving his. For a breath, the world seemed to hold still. But then Storm stepped out, nose lifted, testing the scents on the breeze. Grass, bark, wild traces in the thawed mud, things he had only ever dreamed. Willow pressed close to the glass, her tail flicking, silent as the dawn. Staff watched with quiet hope, and Aris lingered longer than he meant to, afraid to break the fragile magic in the air. Each day, Willow was brought out, bundled in Aris's arms or led on a soft leash, to a shaded spot near the fence. She would sit for hours, dignified and patient, eyes tracking Storm as he learned to climb, to stalk, to bound from shadow to shadow. Sometimes Storm would pause mid-pounce, glance back at her, then resume his game, a kitten's wild energy colliding with the growing power of a true predator. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, just this small, private ritual of separation and longing. Willow watched, not with grief but with an aching pride, as Storm grew braver in his new world. At night, when staff gathered by the fire, Aris sometimes caught Willow staring at the empty dark, as if she was counting the spaces between her heartbeats, measuring the distance that love must stretch. Storm, for his part, began to sleep farther from the fence, curling up beneath bushes or on the high rocks. But each morning, as the sun broke through the trees, he would circle back, pressing his nose to the mesh, waiting, it seemed, for Willow's arrival. She never failed him. Their bond, though stretched by distance, held fast in the hush between fence and fur. These were quiet days, marked by small triumphs, Storm learning to climb, to leap, to watch the world with a hunger no shelter could tame. Each lesson brought him closer to the wild waiting outside. And yet the gentle shape of Willow's devotion lingered, a thread tying the future to everything they'd survived together. And so, with every passing day, the center filled with both sadness and hope. Sadness for the distance that must grow. Hope for the wild heart beating just beyond the wire, preparing to belong somewhere no walls could hold. By the time summer's first green pressed through the last patches of snow, Storm was no longer a kitten but a young bobcat, sinewy and swift, his movements honed by weeks of climbing and leaping and chasing shadows beneath the tall wire sky. His paws left prints all along the muddy edge of the enclosure, a map of restlessness, of a world just beyond his reach. Willow visited every morning. She sat quietly by the fence, her tail wrapped around her paws, watching Storm with the same fierce love and silent pride. Sometimes, as the breeze shifted, Storm would pause, his ears pricking, his eyes searching for something far away. In those moments, Willow's heart seemed to hold still, as if she too could sense the invisible thread pulling at him. One golden afternoon, as light fell through the new leaves and the air vibrated with birdsong, a wild shape appeared at the edge of the trees beyond the enclosure. It moved with the easy confidence of those who have never known captivity. A mature bobcat, her coat dusted with old scars, eyes sharp as the mountain wind. She called out, a deep, rolling yowl that echoed across the field. Storm froze. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to a single note of sound. Willow, on the other side of the mesh, lifted her head, her gaze locked on the stranger. Storm looked from the wild bobcat to Willow, torn between the love that had raised him and the call written in his blood. A hush fell over the center, staff watching from the windows, Aris holding his breath in the doorway. Storm took a slow step toward the fence, pressing his nose through the mesh, seeking Willow's scent. She did not move, but her eyes glimmered with something vast and bittersweet, a permission or perhaps a prayer. Beyond them, the wild bobcat called again, her voice lower now, as if offering a secret only Storm could understand. Storm let out a quiet trill, his own answer, a sound Willow had never heard from him before, wilder and older than any kitten's mewl. Then, with a final lingering glance at Willow, Storm turned and padded to the far end of the enclosure, ears high, body coiled, every sense ablaze. The wild was no longer just an idea, but a living, breathing force calling him home. For a long while, Willow did not move. She watched the spot where Storm had stood, the empty grass pressed flat by his paws. Pride mingled with sorrow in her chest. Her work, it seemed, was nearly finished, not in failure, but in the knowledge that love, given freely, sometimes means letting go. The staff watched in silence as Storm paced along the fence, his eyes fixed on the trees, his future suddenly wide open. In the hush that followed, Willow's quiet presence held the promise that, even as the wild called him away, her devotion would linger, soft, unbreakable, and true. The day of Storm's release dawned clear and bright, a rare, gentle morning that seemed to hold its breath for what was coming. In the sanctuary, staff moved with quiet reverence, preparing everything as if for a delicate ritual. Even the birds outside sang softer, as if the world itself understood this was not just another spring day. Aris carried Willow to the field's edge, cradling her in his arms. She was heavier than he remembered, a comforting weight that reminded him how many silent burdens she had carried for them all. Willow's eyes swept the clearing, seeking Storm, her tail flicking once as she took in the open world. Storm was waiting, pacing the far edge of the enclosure, his body tense and alive, fur gleaming beneath the early light. For a long moment, he stood still, staring at the forest beyond, then back at the people who had raised him, and finally at Willow, watching from the sidelines. Aris opened the gate, his hands lingering on the latch. Storm stepped out, slow at first, the grass bending beneath each careful paw. He approached Aris, nuzzling briefly against his leg, a fleeting gesture, almost shy but heavy with meaning. Gratitude. recognition. Goodbye. Then Storm turned to Willow. He lowered his head, pressing his brow softly to the wire fence between them. For a heartbeat, the world held only the two of them. Willow's eyes shining, Storm's quiet call rising in the morning air. It was not the helpless mewl of a kitten, but the voice of a wild creature giving thanks and taking leave. Willow's ears twitched. She made no sound, only blinked slowly, the way a mother might when letting go. Storm waited a second longer, then, as if guided by a force older than memory, bounded forward, across the clearing, through the open gate, into the trees where the wild bobcat had called days before. He didn't look back. His steps were sure, each leap carrying him farther from the world of warmth and shelter, deeper into the home that had waited for him all along. The forest swallowed him with hardly a whisper, branches swaying in the hush. Willow sat very still, her tail curled around her paws. The space beside her felt impossibly large, but she watched the trees with a kind of peace, as if she could still feel Storm's heartbeat pressed to hers. Around her, the staff kept their distance, sensing that this goodbye belonged to another world, a silent farewell written in the language of fur, wind, and light. Aris knelt beside Willow, his own eyes stinging with the pain and pride of letting go. They remained there until the shadows shifted and the clearing felt just a little emptier, and yet somehow full of something new. The bond, born of loss and healing, had done its work. Storm was free, and Willow, left behind but never truly alone, had given the wild back one of its own. Time slipped gently forward, quiet as snow falling on the old roof of the rescue center. The rhythms of life continued, doors opening and closing, kittens mewling in the morning, the muffled laughter of volunteers drifting down the hallway, and always, somewhere in the heart of it all, Willow. Though her days of raising Storm were over, Willow did not retreat into grief. Instead, she discovered a quiet purpose in nurturing new lives. Tiny opossums orphaned in a spring flood, a trembling rabbit rescued from a nearby field, a litter of abandoned kittens carried in from the rain. She greeted each with the same silent patience, curling around them, her deep purr weaving a cocoon of warmth that promised safety even in a world that could be so unforgiving. Aris watched her with new respect. He saw how the staff gravitated to Willow for comfort, how children on tours lingered by her side, drawn by something soft and ancient in her gaze. She had become the heart of the center, a symbol that healing wasn't just possible, but contagious. The story of Storm and Willow spread beyond the mountain valleys, whispered on social media, retold at dinner tables, picked up by local news. People wrote in from distant towns, moved by the notion that love, given freely, could change the course of even the wildest life. But the truest legacy lay not in words or headlines, but in the quiet echo of devotion that remained after Storm had vanished into the pines. Some nights, when winter crept back and the wind rattled the eaves, Aris would review footage from the remote camera traps set deep in the woods. On one such night, after a fresh snowfall had blanketed the mountains, the camera's eye caught the shape of a bobcat, muscular, poised, unmistakably wild. He paused in the clearing, strong and sure, his coat thick and bright against the white. For a heartbeat, the bobcat turned, eyes catching the lens. In that glance, fleeting, mysterious, Aris saw something he recognized. A memory, a connection that no season could erase. In that moment, All the pain and doubt of letting go seemed to fade, replaced by something gentler. Willow's love had crossed the boundary of the home and reached out into the world, carried in storms every stride through snow and shadow. Aris would later write, his words more for himself than anyone else. Warmth doesn't only come from fire or sun, it comes from the heart. Willow's love lit the spark that carried Storm back into the wild, and now, wherever he walks, that light travels with him. Outside, winter would always return, but inside the rescue center, and somewhere in the wild hills beyond, a flame kept burning, a quiet testament to the power of love and the lives it sets free.